table in the back. In your packet, in the packet you'll find the press release that has the summary that we put together. It's a little bit preliminary, things have gotten refined since it's created in detail, but it's a great place to start. You have bios on all the artists. You have a checklist. This is a working checklist. Do not take every word in it as fact and final. No. Because titles are likely to change. Some objects are likely to change. They're changing in the shows, but we wanted to give you more information as much as we could at this stage. Much of it, I would say 95% of it will remain the same. But if you're going to memorize every title, I don't think this will get maybe the best use of your time. But anyhow, some are still, some of these are still coming together. And then you also have a sheet of links, and all of this will also be on the Docent website. I'm not sure why they printed out this sheet of links for you, because it's probably easier to have it as a digital version where you can click on all of these links. But my colleagues were trying to be helpful and provide information for you. These are all, helpful. Everything from, a radio interview to articles and different kinds of texts and postings about all of the artists that we will be showing. You also have, we also printed this out rather large, but critical learning curve here. You have a floor plan that you can use however you want as you move forward and learn about these exhibitions. So, as I mentioned, we have I'm very excited about this season. I think for myself, as I have come to develop these projects and our whole endeavor in general here at Expand, I think this season really ties it all together in a really meaningful way. As you might recall, our initial impulse or interest in creating all the programming for Expand was to be able to think through this idea of the museum focusing on California and the Pacific Rim and the cultural complexity of what that means as an institution to have that focus. And all of these exhibitions in season 4 are commenting on that kind of complexity, specifically focusing on ideas of cultural legacy, identity, questions of immigration, assimilation, the impacts of colonialism, and they do that by looking at language, translation, and a lot of them incorporate stories that are both personal narratives and sometimes mythic or legendary stories. So you'll see those threads and those elements in all of these exhibitions. And some are dealing with cultural identity in a very specific, personal way, and others are dealing with it in a more broad, kind of open way. But I think, again, as I said in the past about the way we put together these exhibitions, they're very diverse, and they are there's a little something for everybody. So the 7 exhibitions are, and 2 are guest curated, I should say. 5 are curated by me, and 1 is curated, the first one, Mary Rose Covarrubias, I have to learn how to say that better too. Mendoza, Navigating Techniques, is curated by Ricardo Reyes, and Noe Martinez, The Homeland of the Images, is curated by Ruth Estevez. So these are the shows: Mary Rose, Karen Castaño, Cale, Nation, Father Crosses the Ocean, Noe Martinez, The Homeland of the Images, Asthma, which is a collaborative duo, The Harvest and the Ogre's Mind, Marcia Alexander Clark, Ojos Profundos, and Alexander Grant, Telepathy is One Step Further Than Empathy. This is the upstairs floor plan, and where let's see if you can see my cursor. So Alexander Grant will be in Gallery 3, that's where Jimena's show is. Kyoni will be all around the stairs. Marcia will be in Gallery 4, where Mignona is. Noe will be in Gallery 5, where Robert's show is.
Asma will be in Gallery 6, where Daniel's exhibition is, and Carolyn's will be in Gallery, or 6A rather, Asma, and 6B, Carolyn's. The Gallery 7 permanent collection show is going to be named here. On the first floor, will be the Mary Rose Mendoza exhibition. Any questions?
The pronunciation of those names again, the N-O-E names pronounced.
No-E.
No-E.
Yes.
I'll say it a lot more.
Okay. That would be perfect.
So we're going to start with the Mary Rose Covarrubias Mendoza. That she was interesting. At first, she just gave us the Mary Rose Mendoza. So the Covarrubias I'm still adjusting to myself, but the more I say it, I think it's Mary Rose is Enrico, actually, her curator, are both born in the Philippines and have immigrated and lived in the United States now most of their lives. And their exhibition really echoes that. This first body of work, Isms, is looking at, taking this idea of the Greek suffix ism, which means taking sides with, and looking at how it's often used in a sort of pejorative way to describe an adherence to certain ideologies such as racism, feminism, or patriotism. Mary Rose in general, the idea of techniques for Rico and Mary Rose is this idea of tools. And so she looks to the sort of tools or instruments in a culture that teach history. Particularly, these particular works are looking at elements from the classroom. So these are oversized sheets of lined paper where children are taught history, right? And they're folded into kind of boat on some water here with the isms piece. Here's another view of that. Another companion work in this cluster is this piece, which is called Study. And Study chalkboard that's painted directly onto the wall, and then Mary Rose goes in and she does the hand-painted line drawings. But it's again this idea, Mary Rose herself is a teacher, and she's always questioning the way that instruction and personal methods, or historical methods rather, of the way that history gets relayed, and the personal that gets lost in that sort of teaching of histories and the things that get glossed over. For example, in particular, she's interested in the way that history of colonialism in the Philippines has been taught through American education systems. And it's often ignored in the way school children in America are taught history. The fact that the United States was basically occupied the Philippines for many decades. And it's a complicated history, and so she's also, as an immigrant, a lot of her works also explore that question. This is a new piece that she's making for us, and it's based on the Roosevelt Room in the White House, and it is looking at, again, this history of American occupation and colonialism in the Philippines, and particularly even Theodore Roosevelt's role in, he was, here's what she writes about it. Although highly regarded, Roosevelt continued to follow the policies of his predecessor, William McKinley, also believing that Filipinos were incapable of self-governing. So she's kind of looking at elements from the Roosevelt Room, a history book, that becomes the conference table, and I should have mentioned this before, scale is really important to her. So as with the other works, right, these large-scale pieces of paper that have been expanded to human size to become a boat, she's now, with this work, miniaturizing these full-scale things. So the chairs are only around 7 inches high. There's a flag that is the unruled paper. And then some other elements that I'll tell you about that are kind of parodying certain elements in the actual Roosevelt Road. She's also looking to other tropes of immigrant culture and also playing with scale. The pink pastry box for her is a symbol of many Asian immigrants who come to the United States, and the symbol of their own culture, and find in those very specific bakeries and where they can get those familiar home pastries that remind them of their home countries and their culture. Another project or piece is this piece, which uses the word copyright. And I want to get this right.
What is the significance of the logo?
I'm about to explain it to you. I just want to get the information correct. One second. So the term kapwa is it means togetherness, and it relates to kind of a broader value system of indigenous Philippine culture, and a kind of interdependency that everyone has on one another. So she's taking it here and taking this word that has all of this significance and meaning in the Filipino culture and making it into a logo and a brand, stamping it on the side of these cardboard boxes. So kind of commenting on not only like ideas about immigration, but also global trade, industrialization, and the kind of kind of shipping out of some of these ideas across cultures and across distance. And those ideas. Sorry, this is in a little bit of a funky order. It was kind of come across in a number of her works.
Can I ask a question? We sort of need to know the history and why is it that the U.S. occupied the Philippines? I have no idea. Spanish American.
Yeah, I mean, it is a long history, and I think I encourage you to do the research to learn about that. We can talk with Rico and Rose more about that, but I don't know that much about the history personally myself either. But yeah, Jennifer, you?
I do. I came to find a really great book. I'll send it to you to recommend to the docents.
Fantastic.
I did it in my master's program. It's a very fascinating book. I'll try to remember the name and get it to you.
Would you mind sending us an email so we have that? Or me an email?
If I can remember what it was.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. Thank you. I mean, I know it is a long and complicated history that builds on the sort of idea of European colonialism in many cultures. Many of these exhibitions are touching on histories of colonialism, and each one people have written books about. So I'm not going to be able to go into the full depth of each of their specific histories, but there's more to learn about each one of these as we move forward. This is, sorry, I should have had this slide earlier in the presentation. This is just a beginning sketch for, that goes with the Roosevelt Room project. This is a new wall. She's going to be creating a new wallpaper, and it's kind of a spoof or cartoon incorporating different images from political cartoons dealing with colonialism in the Philippines, and it'll be a whole wall of wallpaper, a repeating pattern. So again, we'll get there are probably lots of polls and questions we still have at this point, but because this isn't my creative project, I don't know as much about some of these details, but when we go and Mary Rose are here, they'll answer all your questions for you that I can't answer today, but yeah, that's just a kind of preview, give you a sense of what the exhibition will be. The next exhibition is by an artist, Carolyn Castaño, and there's supposed to be an Enya over her name here, the accent, so just to keep an eye out for that.
It is an art.
Oh, good. It's on the checklist, it's what I have to know. So Carolyn is a Los Angeles-based artist who actually spent her childhood going back and forth between Colombia, Colombia, and Cali, California. Her father was an amateur photographer and also owned a print studio that was located in the MacArthur Park region of Los Angeles. And so he had a vast archive of images and sort of family heirlooms and things like that as well. And when he passed away recently Carolyn inherited her father's archive of images, that as she began to explore, she realized actually embodied not only her personal family's experience as an immigrant and kind of back and forth between Colombia and California that they experienced, but a kind of broader idea of what it means to be an immigrant family and have come to Los Angeles in the era that she did. She's mostly known for these gorgeous, bold watercolor paintings. They're large-scale watercolors that deal with elements of landscape. She's spent many years focusing on the history of the flora and fauna, and the history of the representation, I should say, of the flora and fauna of Colombia, particularly Alexander von Humboldt, who was an explorer that went to Colombia in that period of colonization and exploration, and did lots of drawings and writings about the nature there. And so she studied his work and is influenced by that and uses those images to create her own landscapes. She combines her landscapes with these bold patterns and geometric forms, which are also referencing certain ideas about modernism in Latin America. So the geometric forms and patterns either frame or intersect these elements of these landscapes that are both based on real plants, but also kind of invented landscape. And landscape is a really key element for Carolyn in all of her work, because it's about kind of marking a space and a place that is both real and imagined. So it's both this sort of, the thing that we know to be real, but also has all this potential for fantasy and kind of envisioning a future. And for her, this idea of memory and the past and the present is really key. It's a key element of her installation. And another kind of key, it kind of makes its way into the installation. This is an image from her studio where I was just the other day, and this is a big collage piece that's going to take one of the main walls of the gallery that she's currently working on, and you can see that she's incorporating both her landscapes with pull-up pictures from her father's archive. These are images of her father. Here he is overlooking a freeway in Los Angeles, sort of looking to the future, but also with the past of Colombia behind him. There are other elements. There's small details and little relics from their family. There are landscapes throughout the collage. Another interesting element that she and I were talking about is the use of gold in these collages. Gold was crucial to both the kind of conquering and the economy of all of South America. And it's this idea, it was this material that was mined and traveled and exported up and down the Americas, just like people, Carolyn's family. This is gold leaf that's actually used throughout the work, and it kind of references that. Many families she talked about in Colombia have little gold trinkets, and those are also very valuable and personal to them. And gold is sort of, there are gold museums in Colombia. It's a very important part. I don't know if any of you remember from a few years ago, one of the Getty Pacific Standard Times at the Getty, there was the major exhibition about gold and sort of the impact, the significance of gold in pre-Columbian culture. So it's a, millennia year history of the impact of gold and the sort of power of that and its influence throughout South American history. So it's kind of featuring its way into her work as a reference to that history and that connection and that idea again of immigration. So her whole project is sort of this back and forth, like the Cali-esque Cali, this sort of interchangeability of her position in her life, going back and forth between California and Colombia, which her family did many times throughout the course of her childhood. Again, the sort of geometry of modernism is also present in some of these paintings that she's making. Birds, these are warblers, North American warblers that also travel and immigrate between North and South America. So there are the warblers that are throughout the painting, throughout the collage, and also the foods that her family brought with them or would buy once they were in Los Angeles that sort of reminded them of their past. So things like avocados or bananas or black beans. of the installation include photographs of her family in specific California landmarks. Again, this idea of marking time and sort of recording their presence in this landscape as a way of sort of demonstrating their belonging here. This are some vintage photographs of a space in her grandmother's home in Columbia, and this will be this sort of created environment that we'll have as part of the installation that is sort of replicating these planters and these mosaic tile benches. So these photographs will be on display on a larger scale, but then there'll also be sculptural elements and plants that will sort of transport the viewer back to this place, which was like a patio, laundry room, indoor-outdoor dining room space that played all these functions in their life. And throughout the exhibition, there'll be these references to domestic life and sort of creating spaces of domestic life, but also museological display. So it's this idea of what happens when you have perspective on a personal history and you frame it within the context of a museum exhibition. So you'll be able to see things like her grandmother's ruana, which is a shawl that will be on display as a very proper museological object, but it's just her grandmother's shawl. Not just, it is her grandmother's shawl. But so how this idea of the personal has implications on a broader historical perspective. Lastly, there'll be a new video piece that she's creating where she'll be juxtaposing her own family's Super 8 movies of them going to landmarks throughout Los Angeles and California and the Western United States when they first moved here as immigrants, compared to this family from Connecticut. She discovered this footage in, oh my gosh, it's called Big Archive in Washington, in the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress. Where this family from Connecticut traveled the world and made these Super 8 films of them as tourists. And then they made it available for public use. So this is footage of them visiting tourist sites in Colombia with their ponchos. It's just like the one that Carolyn's grandmother has. But they're in this sort of traditional Colombian garb as they visit monuments and sites. And so she'll be comparing that with her own family's kind of tourism footage. Her Colombian family visiting American landmarks and sites. So that's what the video will be. So you can start to see how each of these exhibitions has a lot of specific, rich content and content. I'll keep moving on if there are some dire questions. Interestingly, I've been following, so both Carolyn and this next artist, Kim Mishan, are artists I've known for a long time, and I've been interested in working with them. And I knew that they both dealt with their own personal stories of immigration or references to different ideas about history relative to the contemporary experience. But I had no idea that Kimmy and Karen would both be interested in exploring their personal family history, in particular focusing on their fathers. Kim Mishan also has created a project that is called Father Crosses the Ocean, that is taking her own family's history as a kind of model to look at broader questions about not only immigration, but a kind of long view of a kind of hybridization of cultural mix and ideas that kind of relate, ideas around assimilation. Kimmi's father is a Christian minister, or was a Christian minister. He's now in his 90s and is actually suffering from late-stage Alzheimer's. And so another part of this is her really reflecting on his past and the idea of his memories and his story that he's actually really no longer able to share with her. And so for her, this is a way of processing a lot of this stuff. So there are key elements of the installation, one of which are these ceramic portrait busts. And she did 3 of her father and 3 of herself. And the ones of her father, so she actually was invited to do a residency at a very famous place called Jingdezhen, China, which is the original place where most of the porcelain trade during colonial periods, thousands of years ago in China. This is like the hub of all porcelain creation in China that was then imported to Europe. And so she's looking at the history of the porcelain trade and looking at how that influenced centuries rather, of cultural influence across between Asia and Europe, or like the East and Western cultures. The idea of chinoiserie, have any of you heard of chinoiserie before? Yeah. Right, it's this kind of combination or amalgamation of Asian kind of imagery and techniques. It was Chinese porcelain that was brought into Europe, and then Europeans tried to imitate that, and that became this like hugely influential. I mean, you've seen it in every museum, every decorative arts collection, then went from there, and this is always this kind of real mix of different cultures and sort of recordings of histories and colonialism that they sort of resulted by the colonialism and sort of borrowing or taking of Eastern ideas into Western culture. And so that's a big part of what Kimberly is doing. You'll see with the portrait busts of her father. So she made the portrait busts and these wall tiles, and each one is sort of paired in these vignettes. And the imagery that she used, using this very traditional Chinese porcelain making technique and the pattern making for the tiles as well, she incorporates images from European illuminated manuscripts that are telling Christian stories of demons and monsters and kind of questioning of one's faith and one's ability to kind of persist and follow these true ideals, whatever their beliefs are. Comparatively with the images of herself, her own portrait bust, she's using images from a very kind of essential Asian fable, the Tripmaster monkey, this figure of this monkey who was always in dialogue with Buddha and being challenged to kind of have, strengthen his moral character. He was kind of a naughty monkey, but very also confident and brave. And so she's representing scenes from each of these stories in all of the portrait busts, both the ones of herself and of her father. And there's a lot, we'll get to some of the specifics in each one, and this will be great when she's here for the walkthrough to get the imagery and the specific story or narrative reference that she's mentioning in each one. I'll have some of that in the wall labels, but I don't know that I can have space for all of it. But as I mentioned, this is again an example of these sort of narratives and stories that are weaving their way into all of these exhibitions. There are other vignettes and other kind of ceramic objects that reference other stories, different Buddhist symbols like the peach, and again some of these repeated elements or extracted elements from these decorative ceramic works. Also, as part of the exhibition, are these large-scale photographs. These are quite large. They are 60 by 80 inches. And they are also making this comparison. So this is a photograph that started, she's combining two images, actually. You can see in the background is, three images, I should say this one. It's like a kind of traditional European chinoiserie kind of scene. I don't know if you can see some of these elements in here that are kind of European interpretations of Asian figures and Asian decorative arts. The foreground is an image of her father, and in his living room, he has this couch that she always thought of as being very Baroque. It's a kind of leather couch, but has this ornate wooden decorative element to it. It's where he now spends most of his time. To this day, her father is, of a generation where even, as far as I know, still to this day, or he had been until recently, getting up every day and dressing in a full suit. And this is a kind of central element in her family's home. Behind it, this white line that you see is a line drawing that she's created that's based on a photograph she took at a museum in Portugal. It was a museum for carriages. And Portugal, was a really important colonizing force around the world in the height of its moment of power. And you can see there are both African and Asian individuals in this that are carved into the wheels of this. This is the wheels, can you see it? I can't see it. The two round circular elements on the side are the wheels of a carriage. So they're sort of representing these sort of the peoples of these places that Portugal these carriages were used by ambassadors in large processions. So again, it was not necessarily, it was important for ambassadors to have these very showy things that kind of demonstrated their strength, right, and their role of controlling these other cultures around the world. And so that's why this, the carriage image really fascinated her. So there are 4 of these large-scale collages. This is another one where she's juxtaposing a large a group of ministers, actually, of Korean ministers. I didn't mention that she's from Korea, did I? That's a key part of the whole thing. So her father was they grew up, and she was born in Korea, and he immigrated as a Christian minister to California when Kyung-mi was a teenager. Her father is amongst these other Christian ministers from Korea in this photograph. And then this is another medieval image, from a medieval manuscript of this sort of gathering of influential figures that she's superposing and juxtaposing over the group of men. This one's one of my favorites. This is a picture of her family. Her father's the one in the middle here, having lunch. Again, he's wearing his suit, right? And it's this sort of idea of having these sort of European kind of tendencies, even in their sort of mix of their culture. This is actually while they still were living in Korea, and sort of powerful role that her father had even within this community, sort of central in this photograph. And she's again comparing it with this kind of chinoiserie-esque image from a European painting. This is another example here where she's taken this photograph of her father who's standing. It's a little bit hard to read, but you can see here's his feet here standing in this landscape, all dressed in his suit, but also kind of juxtaposing that and sort of it becomes almost seamless where the reality of the photograph becomes, this one I think even is the most apparent, where the sort of 2 worlds of this sort of representation of this hybrid culture, the mix of all of these different kinds of different references. These are images from, again, the illuminated manuscripts. This is elements from an Asian painting. Oops, drawing.
Did you say her first name again?
Kyung-mi. Kyung-mi. They're gorgeous, and I'm so excited to show them. So I think it's going to be a really interesting and beautiful exhibition. All right. Any other questions about me? The next one is Noe Martinez. Noe is a young artist from Mexico City, and his work in general often explores questions of language, but also his own ancestors' experience and indigenous people in Mexico and their experience with colonialism as well. His family is from the Huasteca region of Mexico, and all of this is written in Latin, so if you're not sure how to spell any of these things, they're all there. This is an example of an earlier work that he did, for example, just to kind of give you a sense of what his larger practice is. He's making a brand new body of work for us, so I don't have too much to show you of the actual work yet, but just to kind of give you some background, this is looking at kind of symbols from actually he's created a kind of alphabet of the indigenous language that his ancestors spoke, and it's one that his parents speak, but they don't necessarily speak to him any longer, and so he's made a lot of his work has been to look back. They were helping preserve and record that language within his family's culture. So he kind of worked with his parents to create this sort of alphabet of symbols, and then created these sculptures that relate to that. So he does a lot of kind of translating within his own practice, where there's an image and a text, and those things are often compared. So these are some other paintings that he makes on these pieces of fabric that you're expected to see both the front and the back, and they're not the sort of rigid single view of a painting, but there's imagery that connects to text in all of them. And that's always something that he does, and that'll be an element of the project he's doing for us as well. He's also studied a lot about the terrible violent history of colonialism in Mexico, and very much interested in uncovering elements of that history that are not often spoken about. So for our exhibition on view here, he's actually looking at a moment in the 16th century during the Spanish viceroyalty when both indigenous people were being used as labor by the Spanish colonizers, but also slaves were brought in from Africa, and well, by way of the Caribbean. So they were brought, actually Portuguese, to the Caribbean, and then the Spanish bought the slaves in the Caribbean and brought them to Mexico because they had already sent the indigenous people to other parts of Mexico and they needed more labor to sort of build up those areas of Mexico that they were trying to develop. So this is an aspect, again, sort of like Mary Rose, and the idea of not talking about those histories, the Filipino colonization and American culture. Noe is talking about how the history of African slavery in Mexico is also a history that's not spoken about very much. So his installation will consist of 11 of these structures, these wooden structures that will be showing drawings that he's making. And the drawings are based on stories that became poems and songs that he's researched from this moment in history. So, or maybe the stories and poems then became songs. And he's transcribed the text of these poems and stories, and so there'll be imagery on one side of these paintings, these drawings, and then the text on the other. We are getting all of those texts translated into English, those poems, and they'll be available for all of you and visitors to hold in your hands as you walk through the installation. This is just an example. Some of the imagery is more abstract, some of it is like landscapes or other elements, but this is just a sample that he gave us. So there are 22 drawings and 11 structures, and the configuration of the installation will look like this. Ignore this part. There were going to be these turntables, but we decided not to. And what else? Oh, the paper. It's not just paper that these drawings are on, they're actually handmade paper that has, I'm not remembering the specific significance, but it's made of a certain kind of fiber and material that is important. And we'll have to ask Noe about that when he comes. But it's not just like any random paper, the paper itself also has meaning. And the last element of his project, well, I should show you, this kind of grouping of sculptures here that are replicas of these branding tools that were used for slaves. So he is arranging them in this configuration here that is sort of making them into this kind of like cage or structure, but I think it's also quite unique. So it's one of those things we talked about a little while back, that I think we were talking about the Sally Mann photographs, that like, this is a history that is not a pretty one. It's definitely fraught with a lot of tension but I think we have to be honest about the complexities of it and talk about it for what it is. I think there are also some really interesting aesthetic, sort of valuable elements that will come from all of these installations. The other thing that, in talking with, I should say this is a project that's guest curated by Ruth Estevez, who is based in Mexico City. She's used to be here in Los Angeles at the Red Cap, but she left because she's also curating the Sao Paulo Biennale for this year. So she's kind of an amazing thinker. She's definitely, I would say, one of the most important young curators working in the world today. So we're really lucky to get to have her perspective here on this project, and she really believes that Noe is an important and influential artist coming out of Mexico right now. But what she did say is this idea of, and it's true I think in many of these exhibitions, Noe is really drawing together historical research, so things that are true and real, with his own imaginary, right? Images that are sort of his own interpretation. And the fact that he's using poems and stories and texts, these are things that are passed down over many hundreds of years and many different people and many different interpretations. So the idea of like how we know of history and what we know to be true and what's still told and what's not told, all of those things I think are important threads that I think you'll see more and more from uniting many of these projects. Thoughts, questions? This next show is a little bit of a departure. definitely a little bit lighter in subject matter. It's this collaborative duo, Asthma, who are also based in Mexico City. One of them, Matthias, is from Ecuador, and Anya is the other collaborator in the duo. They very rarely actually refer to themselves by name. They're very much interested as a man and woman working together as a collaborative duo in kind of challenging ideas of their project overall, challenging ideas about authorship and kind of who has more control or say, and so they're very deliberate in their work together as two people because they want to push against this idea of having a kind of authoritative voice of one person being this knowledgeable creator. It's very difficult to say like, oh, Anya did that, or Matthias did this. Everything is Asma. And both of their hands are in everything, and I think that's personally I find that to be really fascinating. They work also a lot around ideas of translation, where they'll take texts and stories and translate them into images that kind of take on all different kinds of materials and forms, from wood and this is silver-coated metal, cast and carved bannock wood. This is a similar element of another element of the story on caustic. It's called soft wax, but it's a microparaffin cast and encaustic paint. Again, just to give you a sense of this is a previous installation where they're telling elements of a story, of a text, and referencing those moments from a narrative, but kind of translating them into all these different kinds of forms. So they often combine elements. This is another example. This is a poem. And the poem inspired this entire installation that's made of all these different materials and different elements and scale. They often work with natural materials. There'll be a live flower in our installation. So our installation is based on this idea that they want viewers to imagine they're entering the mind of an ogre. First it was a giant, but we decided ogre was a little bit more appropriate. Traditionally, ogres in many myths and legends in many different cultures have always represented the other, this kind of scary monster. Again, monsters too are another kind of thread you'll see kind of coming in and out, and how something other than ourselves, something different from ourselves, is quickly identified as a kind of monstrous entity. And so the installation will consist of different sculptures and this video component. So this is a new endeavor for them where they're going to be creating a video piece that will be an interactive, almost like a video game, and visitors will be able to see into this video world, but there'll be a kind of feature that is a resin sculpture, and it will be shaped like the eyes of the ogre. So you'll be kind of now you're inside the ogre's mind. So you're inside looking out at what the ogre sees, and you'll be able to navigate this digital landscape. Elements of the digital landscape will also come into play in the real landscape. I can show you this drawing. There's two. This is what I'm working with, guys. So where we are. So like here's the video component, and there'll be this kind of video controller, and then there'll be this flower that is featured in the video in the digital version, and it'll be there in real life. It's going to be a white flower that we're going to change out every week, and there'll be colored water that will soak up the color from, and every week the flower will run the course of its life. And there are other elements. The other key sculptural component is this kind of harp-like sculpture. There's a sound component to the video as well, and every month, this is the story that you'll hear in this text, they'll be updating the stories for the inner monologue of the ogre that you'll hear, and they work with a composer in Mexico City to compose this soundtrack. If you look at this little image here, it would be this kind of transparent curtain with this little harp-like sculpture referencing this sort of inner conflict and turmoil and the kind of emotional state of the ogre. So I think by bringing us into this kind of somewhat fantasy world, they're also getting us to kind of imagine or relate to this idea of otherness that might exist within all of us. In the next room over, Marcia Alexander Clark is also exploring ideas of otherness. She was born and raised in Chile. Her parents were American missionaries in Chile, but she spent her whole childhood there into her teenage years or even early adulthood, and very much identified with that culture. Then came to the United States. Well, identified to a certain extent within Chilean culture, but she was never fully Chilean. And then coming to America, she never felt like she was fully American either. So she described her experience with culture and identity as if she was looking through a keyhole. And she makes these very intricate and complex video works that kind of represent that experience. So she often photographs nature and landscapes, like Carolyn. And then she takes little slices of the footage, of the imagery, and she creates complex structures or almost like scores, musical scores, and music and systems and structures are very important to her. And she creates these very elaborate video installations these are all composed of tiny slivers of different imagery that she's made videos out of. Music is another main kind of central force in her practice as well. She collaborates often with choral ensembles. So we'll be showing a range of different video works that both kind of replicate the sound and the image work together to create this experience. It's very meditative, it's very repetitive, but very minimal at the same time. For the opening on the 18th, she commissioned a composer to create this choral piece that goes with two of the videos, or at least one of the videos I think that we're showing. And then it's a chorus, a really interesting chorus. They're based in Idlewild, all women, volunteers. The ages of the women in this chorus range from 29 to 84. And they worked together and they created this composition that Marcia then used in her video piece, and then based on a system and structure that she designed, kind of reconfigured the elements of this choral piece so that it gets kind of abstracted in the context of her video installation. So they'll be here on the 18th and they'll perform this choral piece from start to finish, which is quite different from the way that Marcia is presenting the kind of choral piece as a soundtrack to her film. So you'll have both the composer here in conversation with Marcia and the singers to be able to talk about that. So there'll be 3 video pieces. One will be sort of an immersive video space, and then a 5-channel video that has no sound. This is why we have no sound in Noe's installation, because they were going to clash. I'm hoping that the sound in Asma's installation here, or if you look at your floor plan, won't overlap too much, but we will see. And then lastly, we have this project by Alexander Grant. Telepathy is one step further than empathy. Alexander is an interesting artist because she does many different things, and she's does them all in great depth. She's a painter, and she makes these extraordinary, dynamic, large-scale paintings, often based on text. Recently, she's been focusing on this one quote from the play Antigone. It's the moment in the play when Antigone sacrifices her own life for that of her brother, and it's when she says, "I was born to love, not to hate." And for Alexandra, this idea of love is, it's to think about love in this context as this sort of generous, like sort of gesture of reciprocity. The title of the exhibition is "Telepathy is One Step Further Than Empathy." And she explained it to me this way, which I thought was really interesting and helpful. Empathy is when you're sitting down for someone and the person across the table from you is cold, and you can tell that they're cold, and you can feel bad for them that they're cold, or maybe lend them your sweater or something, but you don't feel cold yourself. But telepathy is when they feel cold and you feel cold too. And so this idea of thinking about other people, this idea of otherness as not separate from ourselves, right? It's similar to what Asma is kind of encouraging us to do, to sort of see ourselves in the other, the way that Antigone wants to give up herself, to give her own life for her brother. This idea of, and for Alexander, that's really what we need more of in this world, this idea that we can can not just think of ourselves in opposition to somebody else, but on a kind of equal level with another human being, and to understand the humanity in somebody else. That's represented, I think, in her paintings as well. These very dynamic splashes versus these kind of rigid lines. It all kind of overlaps and intersects. The text itself becomes almost obscured in different places. It's repeated. It's seen from different perspectives. It's really woven together with the painterly marks and gestures. And she does it in many forms. Just to give you a sense of scale, these are the 3 new large-scale paintings. They're actually almost too tall for our walls. We're going to have to hang them off the beams. So we're going to have 5 of these large paintings in our installation. She also makes these neons with the same phrase repeated: I was born to love, not to hate, but it's in mirror writing, right? So whose perspective are we looking at? The fun thing about these neons too, there's 2 forms, but we're working, fingers crossed, on getting these mirrorings of these neons as installations installed outside the building as well. I'm awaiting approval on this, but I hope that it's going to come together. And then there's another component of her practice. So I said Alexandra is a painter. She also actually has a publishing company where she publishes other artists' books. And then she has another endeavor that is called the Grant Love Project, where she works with other artists, like these beach towels. These are beach towels made in collaboration with an artist, Devin Suno. And this is her sort of brand, her sort of signature logo. She works with jewelry designers. These are these hoodies that are made with these sort of, what's the word, like women in best practices kind of environments with sustainably sourced fabrics and things like that. And then there are prints and t-shirts and all these elements. And there'll be a little store, a pop-up shop in our lobby. And often she does this, it's a philanthropic endeavor that she does often in many different cases. And they all benefit other nonprofit entities. In our case, this Grant Love pop-up shop, and this is pretty exciting and historic actually, is going to be funding an acquisition fund for the museum to acquire work by women and people of color as we move forward. She recently attended a conference and learned that only 11% of major museums in the United States, collections of major museums in the United States only have 11% of works by women. Ours is not outside of that statistic. So for us to be moving forward in this moment, it's very exciting as we look forward to the new building and what lies ahead for the institution. I don't know of any other museum that's ever done anything like this in this way. It also is a history, so it's kind of important that we understand that this is a conceptual artwork in the context of a museum. So we're thinking of this Grant Love pop-up shop as an artwork, as a conceptual project. There's a history of that many artists have done sort of retail endeavors in museum spaces as interventions that are calling into question where value lies. And with an artist, with the museum, with the visitor, people coming into our museum are going to be able to have a certain amount of power. They are invited to purchase elements of things. This is what it might look like in a pop-up shop. We're hoping to get a neon in here also, and this is just a beginning sketch of what the pop-up shop furniture might look like. What was I saying? This idea, of retail shops, it's also, again, coming back to her ideas about telepathy and reciprocity, right? She's an artist, as part of this project, giving back to not only the museum, but other artists, because when the museum ostensibly purchases work from other artists, that we're giving to that other artist, right? So it's really kind of pointing out the circuits of exchange, the idea of where value lies. And there's a lot of really interesting questions. It's not by accident that we're doing this project here in this space that was a former retail space. It looks like a retail space, particularly in the lobby. And so she's very much interested in playing with that. So how we can challenge our visitors to think about what a museum is, what a retail space is, where those lines are, and what's meaningful in identifying one thing as something that's meant just for display. Because you know that anytime an artist shows a work of art in a museum, the value, the monetary value of that artwork increases. Right? So it's not all of these artworks in every capacity. Every time we show an artwork, it's connected to a market system of art. And so there's a complicated network and an interesting conversation happening there. But it also comes back to so many of these other questions and things about, again, ideas of otherness and reciprocity and sort of sharing and understanding of that idea of our place in the world. So, like I said, it's a really diverse group of artists and projects and a lot to wrap your head around. Lots and lots of content, lots of different histories, and lots more to learn, I'm sure. Any questions, or have I completely overwhelmed you all? Okay, we'll one at a time. Jennifer, raise your hand.
When do you think that we'll know what noise pieces called?
What they're called? Good question. I just sent an email to the curator this morning asking her for a final checklist. We hope to know that any day. I'm trying to remember if in here there are some references to actual, to some temporary titles, but we're waiting. We're hoping to get that information. What was your question? Did you have a question? Pat, did you have a question? No. Oh.
Not yet. I will.
Yeah.
Where is Alexander Grant from?
Alexander Grant, interestingly, she's from currently Los Angeles, but she also grew up, she is American, but grew up in Mexico City and in France.
In France?
But mostly Mexico City and New Mexico.
How do we feel questions like where do acquisitions usually raise money usually?
That's a really good question. Most of our works in our collection we've acquired through donations, actually. There have been historically different moments in the life of the museum, some funding dedicated towards acquisitions, and there was a time when the museum was more actively acquiring things from this acquisition fund. There is an acquisition fund, and we use that occasionally, but it's because of the nature of being a nonprofit organization, we're very careful in the way we use those acquisition funds, and we've been very fortunate to receive a lot of donations, so we've mostly grown the collection that way. Any other questions? No? I'm surprised. So next up, we will be giving you, by the way, we're still in the process of editing final intro texts and wall labels, and when we have those, we'll make those available to you. I encourage you to read all of those if you can before the walkthroughs, because then we'll give you a little bit of a heads up, a little reminder, because there's fonts between now and then. So just to kind of refresh your memories before you come to the walkthrough. We should have the intro text up this week on the website, and the extended version.
So this is going to be up for 6 months?
This will be up through January 3rd, 2021. Yeah, so 9 months. So there's a lot here, but you'll have a long time.